The vast emptiness of space stretched endlessly before Jack Harris as he sat alone in his cockpit, eyes glued to the control panel. The hum of the ship's engine was the only sound that kept him company. Jack was an engineer, used to the silence of space. But tonight something felt different. The loneliness of his station on the edge of the galaxy had never bothered him before, but as the hours passed, it began to weigh on him more than usual. He had no one to talk to, no one to share the experience of deep space with. Suddenly, his monitor flickered. A faint beep broke the silence, barely audible at first. It was a distress signal, weak and full of static, but it was there. Jack's fingers hovered over the controls as he read the message on the screen. The transmission was barely intelligible, but he could make out one word that caught his attention: help. It wasn't the first time he received a distress call, but this one felt different. Most distress signals were from small vessels or cargo ships in trouble, but this one came from deep within an uncharted part of space, near a black hole. The signal was far too weak to be a random transmission, and that meant only one thing: someone was in real trouble. Without a second thought, Jack tapped into the coordinates of the signal. His mind raced. Who could be out there in such a dangerous region of space? Why hadn't they been able to reach help? Jack had heard rumors of alien vessels, ones that were far beyond human technology, patrolling the area. But no one had seen them for years. Was this signal connected to them? The thoughts whirled through his mind as he began to maneuver his small repair shuttle toward the location. His heart was racing. This was dangerous territory, but Jack was no stranger to danger. After all, he had been working on repairs in space for years, fixing everything from engine malfunctions to life support systems, but a distress signal so far from any known human settlements. That was something else entirely. As he got closer to the coordinates, Jack switched on the cloaking system. He had to be cautious. There was no way of knowing if whoever had sent the signal was friendly, or if they were in danger of something far worse. The shuttle hummed softly as it blended into the darkness of space, its faint outline barely visible against the stars. The massive ship came into view moments later, its sheer size taking Jack's breath away. It looked like something from another world, sleek, black, and with sharp angles that made it appear both elegant and menacing. It was a ship of alien design, no doubt about it. His pulse quickened as he brought the shuttle closer. The ship was drifting slowly, as if it had lost power. Its lights flickered weakly, like a dying star in the distance. Jack's mind raced. This wasn't just a random distress call. It was a cry for help from someone in need. But who could be on board? What kind of beings had built such an enormous vessel? He activated the communication system, sending a signal toward the ship. "This is Jack Harris, human engineer. I received your distress signal. Are you in need of assistance?" For a long moment, there was nothing but silence. Jack was about to give up when a voice crackled through the speaker. It was low and guttural, but clear enough to understand. "Human, you are too late." Jack's eyes narrowed. There was something unsettling about the voice. It sounded like it came from a being much larger than any human. And yet there was a strange coldness in it. "What do you mean too late? What happened to your ship?" Jack asked, trying to keep his tone calm. The voice responded again, but this time there was more urgency in it. "We are the Valtherin, and our ship is damaged. We cannot escape the pull of the black hole. The core is unstable. We need help, but do not trust the humans who come for us. You will only bring ruin." Jack felt a chill run down his spine. The Valtheran were a race of tall, powerful aliens who were rumored to be both technologically advanced and incredibly prideful. There were few who dared to cross their paths, and even fewer who survived to tell the tale. But here he was, talking to one of them, one who was clearly in trouble, yet still too proud to admit it fully. The message seemed almost like a warning, but Jack couldn't afford to ignore it. He had made a promise to himself long ago that he would help anyone in need, no matter the risk. "I'm coming aboard," Jack said firmly, pushing his shuttle closer to the ship. I'll fix your ship, but you have to let me help." There was a long pause before the voice responded, this time with a bitter laugh. "You are brave, or foolish. We shall see which." The shuttle docked with the alien vessel, and the moment the airlock sealed behind him, Jack stepped into the dimly lit corridors of the Valthoran ship. It was quiet, too quiet. There were no sounds of movement or activity, just the low hum of the ship's barely functional systems. As Jack made his way through the narrow hallways, he saw signs of destruction. Scorched walls, pieces of machinery torn apart, and pools of what looked like oil or blood. His heart pounded faster. This wasn't just a damaged ship. This was a ship that had been under attack. The Valthoran had clearly been fighting for their lives, and now they were on the brink of collapse. Then he heard footsteps approaching. A figure emerged from the shadows, tall and imposing. The creature that stood before him was even more magnificent and terrifying than he had imagined. The Valthoran commander, a woman whose presence filled the hallway with authority, looked down at Jack with eyes that glowed faintly in the dark. "You," she said, her voice cold, "you're the one who has come to fix our ship." Jack nodded, trying to remain calm. "Yes, I'm here to help. Your ship's core is unstable, but I can fix it." The Valthoran woman studied him for a moment, her expression unreadable. "You are brave, human. Or perhaps you are simply foolish," she said, her words laced with both curiosity and disdain. Jack didn't have time for games. He knew the situation was critical. "I don't have time for this. If you want to survive, I need to get to work." The Valthoran woman seemed to hesitate, her pride clearly fighting with the reality of her situation. Finally, she nodded and stepped aside, allowing Jack to pass. "You may do what you can, human. But know this, we are not weak. We do not need you." Jack couldn't help but feel a flicker of anger. It wasn't the first time someone had underestimated humans, but this was different. These beings were in danger, and still, they refused to acknowledge that they needed help. It was a stark reminder of the prideful arrogance many species in the galaxy held toward humans. But Jack wasn't about to back down. He would help them, even if they didn't want it. The stakes were too high. If he failed, not only would they be lost, but the entire region of space could fall into chaos. As Jack set to work, his thoughts raced. He was about to face a challenge like no other, repairing a ship beyond human understanding, while dealing with a race that saw humans as inferior. But he was determined. The Valthoran would see what humanity was capable of. They might not believe in him now, but Jack Harris was about to prove them wrong. Jack worked as fast as he could, but the damage to the ship was much worse than he had anticipated. Every step he took in the dark, narrow corridors of the Valthoran vessel led him deeper into a puzzle that seemed to have no solution. The whole ship was shaking slightly, as if it was about to break apart. The air was thick with tension, and Jack could feel the weight of the situation pressing down on him. Every minute that passed brought them closer to destruction. His hands moved quickly, twisting tools into place, analyzing the ship's systems. He was in the engine room now, surrounded by alien technology so advanced that it looked like something out of a dream. But this was no time for awe. The core of the ship, the heart that kept everything alive, was malfunctioning. If he couldn't fix it, the whole vessel would be pulled into the black hole. There was no telling what would happen then, but Jack was sure it wouldn't be pretty. The Valthoran commander, whose name Jack still hadn't learned, stood just outside the door, her eyes watching him intently. He could feel her gaze on him, sharp and unblinking. She seemed to be waiting for him to fail. Her presence was both a challenge and a warning, as if she believed this human would never succeed. "You still think you can fix this?" she asked, her voice cold as ice. "You are not like us. Your technology is primitive. This ship was built by beings far beyond your understanding." Jack didn't look up from his work. He couldn't afford to get distracted. "I don't care how advanced your ship is," he muttered under his breath, tightening a bolt. "I'm here to help." and I will fix it." The commander didn't respond immediately, but Jack could hear the soft thud of her boots as she paced back and forth in the hallway. He could tell she was getting impatient. The sound of her footsteps echoed in the vastness of the ship, a constant reminder that time was running out. Jack knew the stakes. If he didn't fix the ship in time, they would be pulled into the black hole's gravity field. The ship's core was unstable, and the magnetic forces were growing stronger by the minute. The commander had mentioned it earlier, but now he could feel it for himself. The ship was slowly being dragged closer to the point of no return. It was a race against time, and Jack was starting to wonder if he could pull it off. The tools in his hands felt heavier with every second. He could hear the distant hum of the engines, but it was getting weaker, more erratic. A few more minutes of delay, and the ship would lose all power. It would be too late. He wiped the sweat off his forehead, trying to stay calm. The commander's presence was unnerving, but he couldn't let it distract him. This wasn't just about fixing the ship, it was about survival. He needed to prove himself, not just to the Valtharan, but to himself. He couldn't fail. Not this time. "How much longer?" the commander asked, her voice tinged with impatience. Jack clenched his jaw. "I'm working as fast as I can. This is a delicate process." The commander didn't say anything for a moment, but Jack could sense her frustration building. He could almost feel her towering over him, expecting him to crumble under the pressure. But Jack wasn't the type to give up, not when lives were on the line. He adjusted his grip on the wrench, his hands moving mechanically as he worked. The tools in his kit were crude compared to the alien technology around him, but they were the best he had. Every time he made an adjustment, the ship shuddered, and Jack felt his stomach drop. The core was weakening, and with each passing moment, they were closer to the event horizon. "Are you even capable of fixing this?" The commander's voice cut through the tension, sharp and mocking. Jack resisted the urge to snap back at her. He couldn't afford to get into a fight now. The weight of her words pressed on him like a heavy stone, but he couldn't let her doubt him. He couldn't let anyone doubt him, not when he was this close. He was human, and humans never gave up. That was what set them apart. That was what made them stronger than any alien force. He steadied his hands, focusing on the wiring in front of him. The glow of the wires flickered ominously, casting strange shadows in the dim light. The ship was falling apart, but Jack wasn't going to let it drag him down with it. He had to find a way to stabilize the core. If he didn't, they would all die here. There was no turning back. The commander's footsteps echoed louder now, and Jack could feel her presence pressing on him like an invisible weight. She was getting closer, her frustration palpable. But Jack didn't look up. He focused on the task at hand, turning the wrench, recalibrating the power flow. Suddenly, there was a loud bang from deeper within the ship. The walls trembled violently, and Jack was thrown off balance. The lights flickered, then went out completely. For a moment, all he could hear was the deafening silence that followed by the sound of his own breathing. "What happened?" Jack asked, his voice strained. "The core is more unstable than we thought," the commander replied, her voice echoing down the hallway. "It is collapsing faster than expected. You must hurry." Jack's heart raced. He didn't need her to tell him that. He could feel it too. The room was shaking again, and this time it wasn't just from the damage to the ship. It felt like the very fabric of reality was being pulled apart. The black hole's gravity was closing in, and every second they wasted brought them one step closer to destruction. He fought to steady himself, grabbing his tools and moving faster than ever before. His hands were shaking, his mind racing, but he refused to give in to the panic threatening to rise up inside him. He couldn't, not when everything depended on him. The commander's voice came again, this time with a hint of something Jack couldn't quite place. Was it fear? "Are you capable of this, human, or have you doomed us all?" Jack gritted his teeth. "I'm not giving up," he said through clenched jaws. "And I'm not the one who doomed you. But I'll fix this." The words came out harder than he intended, but Jack didn't care. He was beyond the point of caring what the Valthuran thought of him. His focus was on one thing: survival. The ship continued to shake, more violently now. Jack adjusted the controls once more, his mind racing as he recalibrated the core's power flow. The Valthuran ship was enormous, and the core was a complex system of energy channels and magnetic fields. Every decision Jack made could mean the difference between life and death. There was no margin for error. Suddenly, a loud crack filled the room. Jack's heart skipped a beat. The core was beginning to break apart. "Come on," Jack muttered under his breath. "Please work." He made one final adjustment, holding his breath as the power levels began to stabilize. Slowly, the shaking stopped. The lights flickered back on. Jack's heart pounded in his chest as he checked the readings again. The core was still unstable, but it wasn't going to collapse. Not yet. He took a step back, his body trembling with exhaustion. He had done it. For now, they were safe. But the Valthuran commander's voice echoed in his ear again, colder than ever. "You may have bought us some time, human, but this is far from over. The real challenge is yet to come." Jack took a deep breath. He wasn't done yet. Not by a long shot. Jack took a deep breath as the ship's internal alarms finally stopped blaring. The core had stabilized for now, but his relief was short-lived. The comm system crackled to life again, and he could hear the commander's voice in his earpiece, sharp and urgent. "Human," she said, her tone colder than before, "the repairs are temporary. We don't have much time before the core becomes unstable again. But there's something else you need to know. Someone sabotaged this ship." Jack froze. Sabotage. His mind raced as he processed the commander's words. A ship as advanced as the Valthurans. How could it have been sabotage? He had only just finished stabilizing the core, and now there was a new threat to deal with. Before he could respond, the commander's voice continued. "We don't know who did it, but there are signs. The damage is too precise to be accidental. Whoever did this, they know what they're doing. They've tampered with the core's power grid, and the external damage is no accident either. Someone wanted this ship to fail. I need you to investigate, human. You are the only one who can fix this, and if we don't find out who did it, the sabotage will continue." Jack's heart raced. He had already pushed his limits repairing the core, and now this. He couldn't shake the feeling that something bigger was at play. Someone had intentionally targeted the ship, and he was stuck in the middle of it all. The first thought that crossed his mind was the crew. Who among the Valthuran could possibly want to sabotage their own ship? He had seen how the commander had looked at him with suspicion, as if she didn't trust him. Was there a rift within the crew? Or was there something more sinister going on? "I'll do what I can," Jack replied, his voice steady despite the storm of questions swirling in his mind. "But I'm going to need some more information. Where do I start?" "There are records," the commander said quickly, "in the ship's control room. I sent you the coordinates. You'll need to look through the logs and data to figure out who did this. But be careful. The sabotage might not be the only threat aboard this ship. Whoever is behind this might be watching you." Jack nodded, though the commander couldn't see it. He had his mission now. He wasn't just fixing the ship anymore. He was investigating a crime. And the stakes had just gotten a lot higher. He grabbed his toolkit and made his way to the control room. As he navigated through the narrow metallic corridors, his mind kept drifting back to the commander's words. Sabotage. Someone on this ship had deliberately caused damage. Was it a member of the crew? Or could it be someone else entirely? An outsider, perhaps. He couldn't be sure, but Jack had learned long ago that in dangerous situations like this, nothing was ever what it seemed. The Valthuran ship, with its alien design and technology, seemed almost alive. Every sound, every shift in the metal walls, sent a shiver down Jack's spine. The ship felt like a maze, and he was the intruder, wandering through its twisting hallways and secret compartments. It wasn't just the sabotage he had to worry about. There was something else lurking in the shadows, something Jack couldn't yet understand. He reached the control room, a vast space filled with holographic screens and alien tech he could barely comprehend. At the center was a large console, and Jack approached it cautiously, his eyes scanning the various readouts. The ship's systems hummed with life, but something didn't feel right. His instincts told him there was something off about the way everything was operating, and he was determined to find it. He began scanning the logs, looking for any irregularities, but the more he dug, the more questions arose. The damage to the core wasn't just a random malfunction. Someone had deliberately rerouted the ship's energy, causing the magnetic fields to destabilize. The external damage had been done with precision, targeting the ship's weak points. And the damage wasn't recent. It had been building up over time. As he sifted through the records, one name kept popping up: Vathor. It was the name of one of the ship's engineers, someone Jack hadn't met yet. The name was listed on multiple logs, some related to maintenance and others connected to the damaged systems. But what caught Jack's attention was the last entry, a note in the log about a special modification made to the ship's core. Jack's brow furrowed. Special modification. That didn't sound good. His hands trembled slightly as he opened the record, reading the description of the alteration. It was an upgrade to the ship's power grid, an enhancement to make the engines more efficient. But Jack knew better. If someone had tampered with that upgrade, it could be the key to everything. He dug deeper into Vathor's logs, looking for any signs of recent activity. There it was, an unauthorized access to the core system. Someone had gained access to the ship's most vital systems without permission. The logs didn't show who it was, but the timing was clear. Whoever had sabotaged the ship had covered their tracks carefully. The log entries were wiped clean, and Jack could only guess how they had managed it. Jack's heart raced as he realized the magnitude of what he had just uncovered. The sabotage wasn't a random act. It was a calculated attack on the ship's core, and someone had been planning it for a long time. But who could it be? And why? His thoughts were interrupted by a soft noise behind him. He spun around, instinctively reaching for his blaster, but there was no one there, just the empty room. The silence was almost deafening, but Jack couldn't shake the feeling that he wasn't alone. The commander's voice crackled in his earpiece again, snapping him back to reality. "Have you found anything, human?" Her voice was tinged with a new urgency. "The core is still unstable. We don't have much time. We need answers, and we need them now." Jack hesitated for a moment, trying to process everything. He couldn't ignore the fact that something bigger was happening here. The sabotage was only the beginning. He wasn't just dealing with a mechanical failure. He was tangled up in something far more dangerous. "I found something," Jack replied, his voice steady despite the chaos in his mind. "There's a log entry about a special modification to the core system. Someone, Vathor, had access to the core, and there's a record of unauthorized changes. I'm going to need to track down this engineer. He might know more about the sabotage." "Vathor." The commander's voice grew colder. "He's one of our engineers, but he disappeared several days ago. No one's seen him since." Jack's mind raced. Disappeared. That didn't make sense. Was Vathor involved, or was he a victim in all of this? There was only one way to find out. "I'll track him down," Jack said firmly. "But I need to move fast. The ship is falling apart, and we don't have much time." The commander didn't respond immediately, but Jack could hear her breath catch in the silence. There was more to this than she was letting on, and Jack was about to uncover a truth that no one on this ship was ready for. As Jack made his way to the storage bay, where Vathor's personal quarters were located, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was walking into a trap. Every step he took felt heavier than the last, as if the ship itself was drawing him closer to something he wasn't meant to understand. The deeper Jack delved into the mystery, the more he realized that the sabotage was only the beginning of a much darker secret. And in the end, it might be up to him to save them all, or watch them all burn. Jack's footsteps echoed down the dimly lit corridor as he made his way toward the storage bay. The silence was deafening, and the only sound was the hum of the ship's failing systems. The air felt heavy, as if the entire ship was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. Jack couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched. Every corner seemed to conceal danger. Every shadow stretched long and ominous. When he reached the storage bay, he hesitated for a moment. The door slid open with a soft hiss, and Jack stepped inside, his eyes scanning the dark room. The walls were lined with crates and equipment, but it wasn't the clutter that caught his attention. It was the faint glow of a console in the far corner. He moved toward it cautiously, his hand instinctively resting on the grip of his blaster. The console flickered as he activated it, the screen displaying a series of encrypted files. He began to sift through them, searching for any clue about Vathor's disappearance. His fingers moved quickly over the keys, his mind racing with questions. Why would Vathor vanish right after the sabotage? And what was the real motive behind the attack on the ship? It didn't add up. As Jack accessed more of the files, his eyes widened. There were records of classified experiments conducted aboard the Valthoran. Experiments that seemed to involve dangerous, unstable technology. Jack's breath caught in his throat as he realized what he was looking at. These weren't just routine maintenance logs. These were details about forbidden technologies, things that could destroy entire worlds. The sabotage wasn't about causing a malfunction. It was about something far more catastrophic. Just then, a loud bang echoed through the room, followed by the sound of footsteps. Jack spun around, instinctively reaching for his blaster. His eyes darted to the entrance of the room, where a figure stood, silhouetted by the dim light. It was Vathor. But something was different about him. His usually calm demeanor was replaced by a cold, calculating expression. His eyes glowed with an unnatural intensity, and his movements were jerky, almost mechanical. "Vathor," Jack called out cautiously, taking a step forward. "What's going on? Why did you disappear? And what have you done to this ship?" Vathor's lips curled into a twisted smile. "I didn't disappear, human. I've been right here, watching, waiting." Jack's heart raced as he realized the true scope of the danger. Vathor wasn't just an engineer. He was part of something much bigger, something far more dangerous. The sabotage had been a deliberate attempt to unlock the true potential of the Valthoran's technology, and Vathor had been the key to it all. "You don't understand," Vathor continued, his voice low and cold. "This ship isn't just a vessel. It's a weapon, and I've been chosen to control it." Before Jack could react, Vathor lunged at him, his movements swift and precise. Jack barely had time to draw his blaster before Vathor grabbed his arm, twisting it with a strength that wasn't human. Jack gritted his teeth, trying to break free, but Vathor's grip was like iron. "Let go of me," Jack yelled, using his free hand to punch Vathor in the chest. But Vathor didn't flinch. Instead, he tightened his grip, and Jack's vision blurred with the pressure. For a split second, everything went black. When Jack's vision cleared, he found himself slammed against the wall, gasping for air. He could barely stand, his head spinning from the impact. Vathor stood in front of him, a smug look on his face. "You're weak, human," Vathor taunted, his voice filled with disdain. "You're nothing compared to the power of this ship." Jack gritted his teeth, his eyes narrowing with determination. He wasn't going to let Vathor win. With a sudden burst of strength, Jack kicked Vathor in the knee, forcing him to stumble back. The brief moment of respite was all Jack needed to regain his footing. He reached for his blaster again, this time more carefully, and aimed it directly at Vathor. But before he could fire, the entire room shook violently. The lights flickered, and the walls groaned under the strain. Jack's heart skipped a beat as he realized what was happening. The black hole. The ship was being pulled toward it. "We're running out of time," Jack shouted, his voice tinged with panic. "We need to stop this, now." He reached the cockpit, where the control panels blinked erratically, flickering with every passing second. He could see the black hole's silhouette on the monitor, now just a distant speck in the void of space. But they were far from out of danger. The ship's path was still unstable, and he had no idea how long it would take to fully regain control. It was a race against time, and Jack wasn't sure he was going to win. He sat down in the captain's chair, his hands hovering over the control panel. The situation felt hopeless. The ship had taken too much damage, and even if he managed to steer it back on course, there was no guarantee they could escape. He couldn't help but feel a sense of despair wash over him. The crew was dead or missing, the sabotage still unexplained. And now Vather, who had once been his ally, was lying unconscious in the storage bay. And yet, despite everything, he still had a glimmer of hope. Maybe it was the same stubbornness that had kept him alive all these years as a soldier, or maybe it was the adrenaline rushing through his veins, pushing him forward despite the odds. Whatever it was, Jack wasn't going to give up. He couldn't. He turned back to the control panel and began to scan the damaged systems. His heart skipped when he saw something that caught his attention. A power surge, originating from one of the lower decks. It wasn't from the engines or the life support systems, but rather from a section he had never seen before. Curiosity gnawed at him, and with a determined sigh, he got up from the cockpit and headed toward the lower decks. The corridors were darker here, and the strange sensation that something was wrong grew stronger. As he walked deeper into the ship, Jack could feel the pressure building, not just from the failing systems, but from something else, something more intangible. The feeling that the ship itself was alive, aware, seemed to grow with every step. Finally, he reached the source of the power surge, a small room tucked away in the farthest corner of the ship. The door was slightly ajar, and Jack hesitated for a moment before pushing it open. The room was empty, save for a single glowing device in the center. It looked like a strange alien artifact, pulsating with energy. It was connected to the ship's systems in a way that Jack couldn't quite understand, but he could feel its power resonating through the air. As Jack moved closer, the air in the room seemed to shift, becoming heavier, more charged. The artifact seemed to beckon him, its glow becoming brighter with each step. Without thinking, Jack reached out and touched it. The moment his fingers made contact, a surge of energy shot through his body, making him gasp in surprise. His vision blurred for a split second, and when it cleared, he was no longer standing in the small room. He was somewhere else entirely. He found himself standing in the middle of a vast, alien landscape. The ground beneath his feet was cracked and dry, and the sky overhead was a deep shade of purple. Jagged rocks loomed in the distance, casting long, eerie shadows. The air was thick with an unfamiliar atmosphere, and Jack could feel his chest tighten as he tried to breathe. It wasn't natural. It felt suffocating, almost as if he wasn't meant to be there. Before he could process what had happened, a voice rang out from behind him. Jack spun around, his heart racing as he prepared for a fight. But the figure that approached him wasn't an enemy. It was a woman. Her tall, imposing frame was unmistakable, and her deep blue skin shimmered under the alien sky. She was unlike anything Jack had ever seen, with glowing tattoos tracing down her arms and a calm, regal presence. She was beautiful in an otherworldly way, but there was something unsettling about her, something Jack couldn't quite place. "Who are you?" Jack demanded, his voice tense as he held his ground. His mind was reeling from the strange vision, but he couldn't afford to let his guard down. The woman's gaze was intense, almost piercing, as if she was studying him. "I am Naira," she said softly, her voice carrying a weight that seemed to resonate with the very land itself. "And you are the human who has awakened the power of this ship." Jack blinked, trying to make sense of what she was saying. "What do you mean? Where am I? What's happening?" Naira's eyes softened, but there was a sorrowful edge to her expression. "You have unlocked something far beyond your understanding, something that has been hidden for millennia. The ship you are on is not just a vessel, it is a key. And you, human, are its chosen keeper." Jack's mind raced. A key. Chosen keeper. None of this made sense, but as he looked into her eyes, he felt an odd pull, a sense of destiny that he couldn't ignore. The sabotage, it wasn't just an accident, was it? Jack asked, his voice quiet with realization. Vathor, he was trying to use the ship's power, wasn't he? Nera nodded slowly. Vathor was a pawn, just like you. But now, you have a choice. You can either embrace the power of the ship and use it for good, or you can destroy it. Forever. Jack's heart hammered in his chest as he considered his options. The power of the ship could change everything, but at what cost? He didn't know if he was ready for the responsibility. But one thing was clear. This was bigger than just surviving. The fate of the galaxy could rest in his hands. I'll do whatever it takes, Jack said, his voice steady now. I won't let this power fall into the wrong hands. Naira's gaze softened, and she gave him a small, approving smile. You have made the right choice, human. But remember, the path you've chosen will not be easy. There will be sacrifices, and the consequences may be more than you can imagine. With those final words, the vision began to fade. Jack felt the ground beneath his feet vanish, and in the blink of an eye, he was back in the room aboard the ship. His hand was still on the alien artifact, and the energy flowing through it had subsided. The ship hummed again, but this time, it felt different. Alive, almost as if it had awakened with him. Jack's heart pounded in his chest as he realized that his journey was far from over. In fact, it had only just begun. The silence in the ship was almost deafening. Jack's mind was racing, his body still trembling from the strange experience with the alien artifact. He had touched something ancient, something beyond his understanding, and now he was burdened with a weight he hadn't asked for. The ship's systems were still flickering, but they were no longer as erratic as before. It was as though they were waiting, expecting something, or perhaps someone. But what exactly had he unleashed? Naira had spoken of a great power, a force that could change everything, but the choices weighed heavily on him. He could feel the immense responsibility settling on his shoulders. The fate of the ship, of the galaxy, perhaps even of countless lives, depended on what he did next, and yet it felt as if time was running out. The black hole wasn't the only thing threatening their survival now. Jack walked through the ship, his steps slow and deliberate. The corridors felt darker than they had before, even though the lights were on. Something about the ship seemed different, alive, almost. He could sense its pulse, a rhythmic thumping in the walls, like a heartbeat. The ship had been wounded, but now it was healing. But was that because of him? Had his touch awakened something that should have stayed dormant? He didn't know, and right now, he didn't have time to figure it out. There was still one thing that needed to be addressed: the sabotage. Jack needed answers, and he needed them fast. His heart still ached from the loss of his crew, especially Bonner. The thought of his friend's sacrifice made his chest tighten. He had to make sure their deaths weren't in vain. Jack finally reached the storage bay, where Vathor was still unconscious. His body was sprawled on the floor, and the faint rise and fall of his chest was the only sign that he was alive. The alien had been the one to betray them, to risk everything, and now he was paying the price for it. But Jack couldn't afford to waste time on revenge. He had to think about the bigger picture. He knelt beside Vathor, his fingers brushing the alien's pulse. It was weak, but steady. He wasn't sure how long the alien would stay unconscious, but he couldn't afford to wait. With a sigh, Jack stood up and turned back toward the cockpit. He needed to make a decision, and he needed to do it now. The cockpit was a mess of blinking lights and malfunctioning systems, but something had changed. The moment Jack stepped inside, he felt a surge of energy pulse through the ship, as if it recognized him as its new captain. The hum of the engines was smoother now, and the gravity fluctuations had subsided. It was almost as if the ship was alive and responding to him. He sat down at the controls and began to examine the ship's systems. There was a message coming through on one of the communication channels. It was faint, broken by static, but the urgency in the tone was clear. It was a distress signal, and it was coming from an unknown source. Jack's heart skipped a beat. Was it a trap, or was it a cry for help? He didn't have time to be cautious. He had to act fast. The black hole was still out there, pulling them toward its event horizon, and if they didn't do something soon, they would be sucked into its gravitational pull, doomed to be lost in the vast emptiness of space. He engaged the comms and patched into the signal. The voice that came through was weak, distorted, but there was no mistaking it. It was human. Help. Anyone. Please. Jack's mind raced. The voice sounded familiar, but he couldn't place it. The distress signal wasn't coming from the ship's immediate vicinity. It was coming from somewhere beyond, somewhere on the edge of the black hole's pull. Without wasting a second, Jack set the course for the signal. He knew the ship's systems were in no condition for a long journey, but they didn't have a choice. Every second mattered. The gravitational pull from the black hole would continue to increase, and soon they would have no way of escaping. As the ship lurched forward, Jack's thoughts went to the crew members he had lost, to Bonner, to the ones who had given their lives so that others might survive. He thought of Vathor and what he had done, how he had tried to use the ship's power for his own gain. But now, that power was in Jack's hands, and it was up to him to use it for good. The ship's engines whined as they strained against the forces pulling them toward the black hole. Jack's grip tightened on the controls, his knuckles turning white. The ship was falling apart, but he couldn't afford to stop. The distress signal was getting louder, and he was getting closer to its source. Suddenly, the ship shook violently. The lights flickered, and for a moment, everything went dark. Jack's heart raced as he struggled to keep the ship on course. He had to hold it together. For Bonner, for his crew, for everyone. When the lights flickered back on, Jack saw something that made his blood run cold. A massive ship, unlike anything he had ever seen before, appeared out of the darkness. It was a sleek, black vessel, its hull glistening like obsidian. The ship was massive, dwarfing Jack's own, and it seemed to be moving against the pull of the black hole's gravity. But it wasn't alone. A fleet of smaller ships surrounded it, each one armed and ready for battle. Jack's heart skipped a beat. This wasn't a rescue. It was a trap. The ships began to close in, their weapons targeting Jack's vessel. A blinding light flashed from one of the enemy ships, and before Jack could react, the ship's systems went haywire. Alarms blared, and the ship lurched again, this time with greater force. Jack's thoughts were a blur as he fought to regain control. The ship's hull groaned in protest, and he could feel the pull of the black hole growing stronger with every passing second. They didn't have much time. If he didn't act quickly, they would be sucked into the void, and there would be no escaping the event horizon. He had no choice. Jack made a split-second decision. He activated the ship's emergency override, forcing the engines to go into overdrive. The ship shot forward with incredible speed, surging toward the fleet of enemy ships. The enemy fired on him, but Jack maneuvered the ship with a precision that surprised even him. As the ships closed in, Jack's mind raced. He had to find a way to destroy their lead ship, to stop them from chasing him. But how? He didn't have the firepower to go toe-to-toe with an entire fleet. Then it hit him. The artifact. The power he had unlocked when he touched it. It had to be the key. He reached for the control panel, activating the artifact's energy reserves. The ship hummed, and for a moment, everything went still. Then, a massive surge of power erupted from the ship, a wave of energy that engulfed the enemy fleet. The ships around him were torn apart, their hulls disintegrating into space. But Jack didn't stop. He pushed the ship forward, guiding it toward the event horizon of the black hole. It was a one-way trip, but it was the only way to ensure the safety of the galaxy. The ship's hull groaned again as the pull of the black hole became too strong to resist. And then, with one final, heartbreaking lurch, Jack made the ultimate sacrifice. He knew there was no coming back, But as the black hole's gravity tore the ship apart, he felt a strange peace settle over him. The ship, the artifact, the power, it had all led to this moment. As the event horizon enveloped him, Jack's final thought was not of himself, but of those he had saved. His crew, the galaxy, the people who would never know his name. He had given everything for them. And in that final moment, as everything around him was consumed by the black hole, Jack knew one thing for sure. The galaxy would remember his sacrifice. It would remember the human who had given everything to save it.